Did you know that some of boxing's greatest champions weren't just fighting opponents in the ring, but also battling dangerous addictions? From world champions who shocked the boxing world to rising stars who threw it all away, here are 25 worst junkies in boxing history. 1. Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson was the baddest of them all when it came to boxing. At 20 years old, he was the youngest heavyweight champion ever, defeating his foes most viciously. With his aggressive fighting skills, uncanny speed, and punching ability, Tyson ruled the boxing world during the late 1980s and early 1990s. But all in secret, Tyson's life was spiraling out of control. Tyson lived hard, hung with the wrong people, and became involved with drugs. He ultimately admitted to using cocaine regularly, even smoking it before fights sometimes. He once said he fought high on drugs and used a phony penis filled with another man's urine so that he could pass drug tests. Drug use was Tyson's downfall. In 1992, he spent 3 years in prison, and after returning to boxing, he was never the same again. His legendary fight with Evander Holyfield in 1997, where he bit off part of Holyfield's ear, was a sign of his psychiatric instability. By the early 2000s, all his greatness was lost. He had embarrassing fights, went bankrupt after earning hundreds of millions, and struggled with addiction for years. 2. Oscar de la Hoya. Oscar de la Hoya embodied boxing in the 1990s and early 2000s. He won an Olympic gold medal in 1992 and 6 world championships across 6 different weights. Beloved for his handsome looks, charm, and devastating left hook, De La Hoya was the fans' favorite and one of the sport's all-time greatest pay-per-view attractions. But beneath the success, there was a dark side to De La Hoya. He was a drug and alcohol addict, which he did not disclose for many years. In later interviews, he admitted that he used cocaine and alcohol extensively, especially after he retired from boxing. He said that he felt lost when he was no longer competing in the sport and turned to using drugs to cope with depression and anxiety. De La Hoya's addiction also extended to his personal life. His relationships were negatively impacted, and he was involved in scandals like leaked photos of him wearing women's clothing. These scandals tarnished his previously flawless image. He eventually went to rehab, trying to reorganize his life, but the issue of addiction came back several times. Despite his issues, De La Hoya remains a big name in boxing. He founded Golden Boy Promotions, one of the top boxing promotional companies, and continues to be involved in the sport. 3. Julio Cesar Chavez. Julio Cesar Chavez is generally regarded as one of the greatest Mexican boxers in history. With an incredible record of 107 wins, 6 losses, and 2 draws, he was a force to be reckoned with in the ring during the 1980s and 1990s. He won many world titles across different weight divisions and enjoyed the love of millions of people. But Chavez did have a tremendous weakness. He was unable to resist alcohol and drugs. He used and drank too much, and his ego became inflated from all the notoriety. He was in his prime and developed a cocaine and booze addiction, which started affecting his fighting in the ring. His conditioning suffered, and he wasn't as fast as before. By the end of the 1990s, Chavez was not the unbeatable fighter he had once been. His habit also started taking a toll on his physical health, and he started to lose fights that he would easily have won when he was young. His fall was agonizing to watch since fans saw their hero struggling with demons outside of the ring. Chavez finally got help and attended rehab, attempting to kick his addictions. Unlike most other boxers, he was able to recover and went on to become a boxing commentator and coach for up-and-coming fighters. 4. Pernell Whitaker. Pernell Sweet Pea. Whitaker was the sport's best defensive brawler. He was nearly impenetrable, using quick footwork and head movement to avoid punches. Whitaker won world titles in 4 weight divisions and was the pound-for-pound best fighter of the 1990s. But while he was a master of punch avoidance in the ring, he could not avoid the danger of drug addiction. Whitaker's cocaine addiction was revealed when he tested positive for cocaine after a series of fights. In 1998, he tested positive for cocaine after a fight, and his career started to go downhill. Instead of being worried about training, he was living a life of partying and drugs. By the early 2000s, Whitaker was a shadow of his previous self. His addiction brought him financial problems, legal problems, and a rapid decline in his boxing skills. Although he tried later to rehabilitate his life as a trainer, his drug problems tainted his reputation. Sadly, he passed away in 2019 following being hit by a car. Although he will always be remembered for his incredible boxing ability, his drinking made him one of the biggest wasted talents in the sport. 5. Johnny Tapia. If there was a life of any boxer that could be adapted into a Hollywood movie, it was that of Johnny Tapia. It was a life of suffering, tragedy, and moments of pure brilliance in the ring. Tapia was a pressure fighter with explosively fast hands and an in-your-face style. He held world championships in multiple weight classes, but his toughest opponent was never standing across from him. It was, in many ways, himself. Tapia's problem started early. He witnessed his mother being brutally assassinated when he was just 8 years old. That experience haunted him throughout his life, and it led him astray into a world of darkness with drug addiction. He was hooked on cocaine and heroin, and it landed him in the hospital for many arrests, suspensions, and even overdoses. He was clinically lifeless for over 3 minutes due to a drug overdose at one point in his life. Despite his struggles, Tapia never lost the ability to find a means of returning. Whenever people thought he was finished, he would return to the ring and prove them wrong. But addiction is a battle that is never won. In 2012, Tapia passed away in his apartment at age 45. While his official cause of demise was heart failure, many believe years of drug use played a large role. 6. Aaron Pryor. Aaron Pryor was arguably the most exciting fighter of the 1980s. He had an all-action, aggressive style and was renowned for burying foes with incessant punches. Pryor was unbeaten in his prime and was generally considered to be one of the all-time great junior welterweights. But his greatest battle wasn't against any other pugilist. It was with cocaine. Pryor's troubles with addiction started when he was at the peak of his career. When he was winning historical fights, including his historical bout with Alexis Arguello, he couldn't keep himself away from drugs. His addiction affected his training, made him unpredictable, and eventually forced him into an early retirement. Pryor once disappeared from boxing completely. He battled with drug use for years, entering rehab multiple times. His once promising career had completely disintegrated. While he did eventually get clean and became a preacher, it was too late. The damage had been done. He could have become one of the all-time greats, but addiction robbed him of that opportunity. Pryor passed away in 2016, but his story is a lesson to young boxers. No matter how talented you are, drugs can destroy everything. 7. Ricky Hatton. Ricky Hatton was one of the most exciting British boxers of his time. He had a huge fan following and was renowned for his attacking style of fighting, body punches, and never-say-die approach in the ring. He held world titles in multiple weight categories and even challenged some of the biggest stars of the sport, including Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao. But after retiring from boxing, Hatton's life started heading in the dark. Without the sport to guide him on the straight and narrow path, he started to suffer from depression and alcoholism. Afterwards, he admitted to using cocaine, and the booze and drugs combined pushed him into deep-rooted mental issues. He lost his direction and even spoke of committing suicide. Fortunately, Hatton eventually called for assistance and dedicated himself to a better life. He became a coach and mentor to new fighters, utilizing his own experience to guide them clear of repeating the same errors. Even though still a beloved British boxer, his addiction and mental illness issues showed just how hard life after boxing can be. 8. Evander Holyfield. Evander Holyfield is best known to be one of the all-time greats in the heavyweight division of boxing. He was the cruiserweight champion without dispute before he rose to the heavyweight division, where he battled legends like Mike Tyson. His fights against Tyson, specifically the one where Tyson bit off a piece of his ear, are some of the most famous boxing incidents. Like some of the other fighters on this list, Holyfield was never publicly addicted to illegal hard drugs like cocaine or heroin. Nevertheless, his image was sullied by claims that he took performance-enhancing drugs, PEDs. In the late 2000s, there were rumors that he had taken steroids and human growth hormones, drugs prohibited in professional sports. For a fighter who built his name on raw will and determination, these allegations were demoralizing. Even though Holyfield protested any wrongdoing, the allegations followed him for the rest of his career. Even though he was never caught using traditional recreational drugs, his connection to PEDs puts him in the company of fighters whose careers were marred by substance-related controversies. 9. Sugar Ray Leonard. Sugar Ray Leonard is widely considered to be among the greatest boxers of all time. He was fast, gifted, and had an excellent personality that was popular with the masses. Leonard won world titles in 5 weight classes and fought in classic bouts against Marvin Hagler, Thomas Hearns, and Roberto Duran. But in the background, Leonard had a cocaine addiction. Beyond boxing, he used drugs as a coping mechanism for inner problems. He later admitted that his drug use was his coping mechanism with the pressure of fame and his troubled marriage. The addiction destroyed his personal life and nearly ruined his career. Fortunately, Leonard recovers and makes a comeback, both in life and in the ring. He became a motivational speaker and recovery activist for addiction, using his own experience to help others. While his drug use was a low point in his life, his comeback turned his story into one of redemption. 10. Sonny Liston. Sonny Liston was among the best, most intimidating heavyweight champions in the history of boxing. With his imposing physique and crushing punches, he was a force to be reckoned with in the ring. His own life, however, was shrouded in mystery, crime, and drug addiction. Liston had mob connections, and it was widely believed that he threw fights for them. Worse, however, were whispers that he was into heroin. There were some reports that he was seriously into drugs and that it was the cause of his untimely demise. Liston passed away in 1970 at home. He officially passed away from a heroin overdose, but most everyone, including those who knew him and his family, believed he had been murdered. Some thought that he had been assassinated because of his affiliation with the criminal world, while others believed he had accidentally overdosed. Whatever the cause, Liston's life was one of greatness and tragedy. 11. Leon Spinks. Leon Spinks made history when he defeated Muhammad Ali in 1978 to win the heavyweight championship. It was the biggest upset in the history of boxing. Spinks, with only 7 professional fights under his belt, shocked the world by grinding out the great Ali. Unfortunately, his career dwindled after that remarkable victory. Instead of staying disciplined and milking his victory, Spinks led a life of revelry, heavy drinking, and drug use. He lost the rematch against Ali just 7 months later, and his career never reached those heights again. His lack of discipline, combined with drug use, was responsible for the string of losses that ruined his bright future in boxing. Apart from the ring, Spinks struggled with addiction too. He was financially down on his luck and even took on low-paying work just to keep body and soul together. His is a pathetic example of how success can turn out to be short-lived if a fighter cannot prepare himself for it. 12. Riddick Bowe. Riddick Bowe was a dominant 1990s heavyweight. He became the undisputed heavyweight champion when he defeated Evander Holyfield in 1992, and he was one of the greatest fighters of his generation. Bowe had the strength, size, and boxing skills to become an all-time great. However, his career took a bizarre turn. After winning the title, he famously threw his WBC belt in the trash instead of defending it against Lennox Lewis. Many believed this was the first sign that something was off, After retiring, Bo's life spiraled out of control. He was involved in strange incidents, including kidnapping his own family. Although Bo never explicitly admitted to using drugs, everyone presumed that substance abuse was a factor in his unstable demeanor. His physical decline and dubious judgment outside of the ring showed he was battling more than bad luck. He attempted multiple comebacks, but he was never again the same fighter. Bo went from being one of the greatest heavyweights of his era to a cautionary example of what might be lost to habitual distractions. 13. Ike Ibebuchi. Ike Ibebuchi was one of the brightest heavyweight boxing prospects of the late 1990s. He had an undefeated record and was on track to become world champion. He was a resilient, hard-swinging puncher and had a fighting ability that made him dangerous to be in the ring with. Pundits rated him to emerge as the next big boss to overrule the division. However, his career was cut short by his erratic conduct and brushes with the law. Ibebuchi started to show signs of instability, and his behavior outside the ring became more and more disturbing. He was involved in many violent altercations and eventually arrested for beating up a woman. There were also rumors that drug use was responsible for his downfall. Some reports stated that his mental issues were fueled by drug use, which led him to do his self-destruction. Instead of reaching his full potential, Ibebuchi spent years in prison, wasting a career that might have been the stuff of legend. His story is one of the biggest what-ifs in the history of boxing. 14. Paul Spadafora. Paul Spadafora was an extremely skilled boxer who was the IBF lightweight champion and had an undefeated record for most of his professional career. He was a great defensive fighter and was often compared to some of the sport's greatest technical punchers. But in life beyond the ring, Spadafora had serious problems. He was a drug and alcohol addict, which led to many arrests and violent episodes. His worst moment came when he shot his pregnant girlfriend during a drunken brawl. This landed him in jail and seriously damaged his reputation. Even after serving his time, Spadafora struggled to stay clean. His addiction affected his training, and despite several attempts at returning, he was never going to be as good as he was before. He could have been one of the greats, but his self-destruction ruined his life and career. 15. James Toney. James Toney was also one of the most naturally gifted boxers of his time. He had excellent defensive skills, slick head movement, and a tough, old-school style of fighting. He won world titles in multiple weight classes, showing that he had both the ability and punch to hold his own with the top men. But Toney's biggest opponent was not another fighter. It was his own body. Throughout his career, he fought weight issues, often showing up to fights in less than ideal shape. Most credit his constant weight gain and loss to suspected drug use, which prevented him from performing at his peak. Despite his talent, all of this affected his lifespan as a boxer. He has failed drug tests and has been suspended multiple times, which has skewed his reputation. While Toney maintained a long career, most believe that he would have been even greater had he stayed disciplined. His story is an example of how natural talent is not sufficient. There should be hard work and self-discipline in the sport of boxing as well. 16. Tommy Morrison. Tommy Morrison was a Hollywood Star-Lux heavyweight knockout artist. Tommy Gunn in the movie Rocky IV was his fame, but actual fame stemmed from his incredible boxing career. In 1993, Morrison became the WBO heavyweight champion and proved to everyone that he was the greatest puncher of the era. Unfortunately, his success was fleeting. Morrison's life outside the ring was beyond control. He was known to be a party animal, use hard drugs, and engage in irresponsible conduct. He claimed that he had many intimate partners, used hard drugs, and lacked discipline. His wild ways caught up with him in 1996 when he tested HIV positive. After his diagnosis, his boxing career was truly over. However, Morrison would not believe the results of the tests and insisted that they were fabricated. He tried to come back, but his health and legal problems kept him from ever again being at the top. His later years were spent in scandal, and he ultimately passed away in 2013 due to complications from his condition. 17. Meldrick Taylor. Meldrick Taylor was one of the fastest boxers to ever step into the ring. He won a gold medal at the 1984 Olympics and was soon a professional phenomenon. His speed, skill, and ring generalship made him one of the all-time greats of his era. Taylor is most remembered for his mythical fight with Julio Cesar Chavez in 1990. Taylor was in complete control of the fight on the scorecards when Chavez landed a vicious shot with seconds left, and it ended in a controversial stoppage. It's believed by many that this fight changed Taylor's life, both physically and mentally. After his career began to decline, Taylor turned to drugs. He was hooked, and his money problems increased. He was reported to be living in filth, showing how far his life had fallen after boxing. 18. Trevor Berbick. Trevor Berbick was among the talented Jamaican heavyweights who experienced his career highlight when he defeated Muhammad Ali in 1981. Although Ali had passed his prime, the victory was a tremendous feat for Berbick. He also won the WBC heavyweight title in 1986, demonstrating that he was among the division's best. But outside the ring, Berbick's troubles overshadowed his success. He was well known for wild antics and confrontations with law enforcement, and everyone suspects drug addiction destroyed him. His career plummeted after losing his belt to upstart Mike Tyson in brutal knockout fashion. After retiring from the ring, Berbick's own life spiraled out of control. He faced many legal issues and was deported to Jamaica from the U.S. Things didn't improve for him, however. His life was tragically cut short in 2006 when he was assassinated in a land dispute. 19. Zab Judah. Zab Judah was arguably the best naturally gifted boxer of his generation. With blazing hands and lightning-quick reflexes, he was a multi-weight world champion. Fans loved his flashy manner of fighting and his knockout power, and he ranked as one of the best boxers of the early 2000s. But Judah's working life was also contentious. He was hot-headed and often got himself engaged in acrimonious argumentation with rivals, officials, and supporters alike. There was also a string of incidents outside the arena, from street fights, arrests, and charges of drug addiction. At his peak, Judah might have been an all-time great, but his inability to concentrate and his wayward lifestyle eventually caught up with him. He lost fights that he should have won, and his career was more about him than his talent. Although he made several comebacks, he never quite got to the standard that he was capable of reaching. 20. Andrew Golota. Andrew Golota was a dominant Polish heavyweight with incredible size and power. He was one of the top contenders of the 1990s and had the ability to be a world champion. His career was tainted, however, by bizarre in-ring behavior, and everyone assumed that drugs were at least partially responsible. Golota is most notorious for his catastrophic fights against Riddick Bowe in 1996. He was dominating both fights, but was disqualified both times for deliberately throwing repeated low blows. These incidents baffled fans and commentators alike. Why on earth would a fighter throw away a victory like this? His mercurial personality continued into his professional life. He was known to throw in the towel during a fight, to show mental lapses in the ring, and to make strange decisions that cost him big opportunities. Although he did enjoy a long career, he never won a major world title, and his life is as much controversy as it is success. It's what most would assume, substance abuse being the cause of Golota's unusual behavior. Whatever it was, whether addiction or nerves, his poor self-control during the fight held him back from realizing his maximum potential. 21. Hector Macho Camacho. Hector Macho Camacho was amongst the most extravagant boxers in his time. He was noted for his glitzy outfits, fast jab, and cocky mouth, and became a world champion in many different weight categories. Fans admired his bold confidence, and he possessed the talent to back it up. But outside the ring, Camacho lived a wild and irresponsible life. He was frequently in legal trouble with the police and suffered numerous drug issues. His addiction led to erratic behavior, arrests, and the decline of his boxing career. While he kept fighting well into his 40s, he was no longer the reigning champion he once was. Unfortunately, his dangerous lifestyle caught up with him. Camacho was shot in 2012 while riding in a car in Puerto Rico. He passed away a few days later, and police later reported that drugs were found at the scene. His demise was a sad end to a career that could have been remembered for greatness rather than scandal. 22. Michael Dokes. Michael Dokes at one point was one of boxing's most hyped heavyweights. Speed, strength, and natural talent earned him the WBA heavyweight title in 1982. When in top shape, he had the potential to become one of the all-time greats. But Dokes did have one big problem: cocaine. He got into cocaine use and it cost him his career. He lost his belt a couple of months shy of a year from when he originally gained it, and his performances in the ring were inconsistent. Instead of training and maintaining his conditioning, he drank and made stupid choices. His substance abuse became so bad that he was arrested on multiple occasions, and his life outside of the ring was filled with legal troubles. By the time he tried to make a serious comeback in the ring, it was too late. His skills had waned, and he was no longer the formidable boxer he used to be. Dokes' story is the classic story of wasted potential. He had it all to be a legendary champion, but his addiction took everything away from him. He passed away in 2012 from liver cancer. 23. Ricardo Mayorga. Ricardo Mayorga was one of the most volatile boxers in the history of boxing. The Nicaraguan tough guy became popular because of his unorthodox style of fighting and his nutty personality. He was the type of fighter who would mouth off, smoke a cigarette after a bout, and taunt an opponent inside the ring. Mayorga was never the best boxer, but he was a good one due to his toughness and strength. He became a two-division world champion and beat some big names. His poor discipline outside of the ring kept him from becoming a boxing legend, however. Mayorga's partying and reckless ways were no secret. He freely smoked, drank, and had a wild life that often got him into trouble. His issues with drug addiction and poor training habits helped ruin his career. While he continued to fight well into his 40s, he was used primarily as a foil for rising stars rather than a serious contender. 24. Frankie Randall. Frankie Randall was no ordinary boxer. He was the first to defeat the great Julio César Chavez in 1994, shocking the boxing world. Randall was quick, talented, and had a tremendous work ethic. But as much as he reached the top, his demise was lurking just around the corner. Later in his career, Randall struggled with drug addiction. His performances in the ring started to decline, and he lost the edge that had enabled him to become a champion. He continued fighting well into his 40s, far past his prime, likely because he needed the money due to his chaotic life. His later years were beset by strife. Randall suffered from serious health issues, including dementia, that many believe were brought on by decades of drug abuse. He passed away in 2020, leaving behind a legacy that could have been so much greater, if not for addiction. 25. Edwin Valero. Edwin Valero was perhaps the most thrilling knockout artist to ever lace up a pair of boxing gloves. The Venezuelan pugilist possessed a flawless record of 27 victories, all knockouts. Fans thought he had the potential to be a legend, but his life outside the ring was getting out of hand. Valero had problems with drug and alcohol addiction, which magnified his violent streak. His behavior became increasingly erratic, and in 2010 he was arrested for assassinating his wife. While incarcerated, he took his own life, cutting short a potentially illustrious career.